What's up everybody? Grant here from Spectra Racing. Well, today's the day we begin installation of the Maier Racing Fender assembly and Fender flares. So, first thing we got to do is we got to take apart the whole front end, unfortunately. It's going to take some time, and I'll probably be wearing different clothes in a couple of these sections of the videos because it's going to take me a couple days to get everything just perfect. So, but as you can see, this is the Fender assembly. It is going to be significantly lighter. Later on in the video, we will do a weight difference. So these are the flares. All of this is made out of some kind of fiberglass resin, kind of like what you get on a Corvette. It's pretty hard. It's not like flimsy like a lot of fiberglass. It's top quality stuff from Maier Racing, so would highly recommend them. If you have any questions about it, be sure to ask me down below. Let's get started on the disassembly. Okay, so we got the metal fenders off. You can see here they are a bit thinner than I thought they would be, so the total weight savings was about 3.5 pounds each compared to the fiberglass. Now the fiberglass is pretty stout. We have it on here. I had to trim the edge a little bit because we're putting on a fender flare, and the blue tape is to cover the custom vinyl wrap that I did. You'll see at the end of the video. So obviously we're fitting these 335 3018 size rims. These are huge. You see, it is nice and sturdy on here. It's not flimsy at all. They're really high quality stuff from Maier. So now we got to put the flares on. Alright, so I got my buddy Nathan here. We're drilling the pilot holes. We're going to rivet on the rear. You can't, underneath the fenders here in the back, you cannot do any bolts or anything. We could tab weld on some double-ended bolts here, but rivets are just much easier. This car is a pure race car, so there's no reason to have to take these back off again. And if we ever need to take them off, they can just drill them right out. Alright, time to unveil the front. So we finally got the front on. It was a little bit more difficult. We had to shave a lot here on the front to get it to fit. And I got the fender assembly wrapped in this beautiful American flag. Now eventually, the final thing I'd like to do to this car is get a World War II themed vinyl wrap. So this is kind of just temporary for the next year or two. But I think it looks pretty good, especially with the wheels we're putting on it. Okay, so the front flare itself, you see, we couldn't get it to match just perfectly. That's because we are putting a flare that's designed for the stock fender on the fender assembly itself, but it still looks pretty clean. Now we did put some of the fender gap liner so it doesn't slip, but this is pretty solid. Just like the front, it is rock solid. And one of the added benefits is that it's helping hold on my bumper. Now the bumper, as you know, I've hit a lot of cones over the past couple of years, and it started to sag. It's mainly just due to the plastic nature. This little area right here with the stock fender, there were these little metal tabs that were in here. The new fender doesn't have those, but it uses the flare itself to hold on to the bumper. And it does a much better job of holding onto the bumper, and I finally got my splitter to the angle I like it. So before it was kind of angled down too much, and even with the splitter end-rons, which were chassis mounted, I couldn't get that angle just perfect. So to install the front fenders, we simply just use some Allen key bolts, and we use the fender gap liner. Now just use some washers on both sides. This fiberglass on both sides is very strong, so it is not going anywhere. This Maier Racing fiberglass is just top-notch stuff. Alright, so the question you're probably asking is, does it fit in the fender well, and what did I have to do to the fender well? So when I finally got it out to the driveway with the wheels on, it did rub. So what I did is I took a cutting wheel and I cut out the inner lip of the flare itself. So that provided me the about, I don't know, 5 millimeters or so of space that I needed. And the other thing is I am not running a 10mm wheel spacer anymore. So these wheels have enough back spacing where I don't need that, and I'll still be able to run over -3 camber. Now I did, for instance, had to remove this little tab here. It was cutting. That is from hitting a big rock somewhere. Not going to bother replacing it. I did order replacement front fender wells, but the OPR quality was absolutely terrible, so I just left the stock ones in. So do not buy replacement. The OEM quality is much better. So if you're wondering what suspension setup I'm running, I did a previous video on this, on how the smaller diameter coilover springs help with running a bigger tire. And on top of that, I made the strut tower hole larger, which is legal in SCCA, in Street Mod at least. This enables the custom Vorschlag plates to come in more, getting more camber plate camber. Meaning you can run a wider tire because you won't have to sacrifice camber. Alright, so the rears are on. We used some aluminum rivets. It's held on really, really nicely. This is some really solid stuff from Maier. It's not deflecting or anything, so when I inevitably hit a lot of cones, it's going to be rock solid. And they weren't too heavy to begin with. Okay, so one of the other things you're probably wondering about the Maier Racing fender flares in the rear here, if you decide to do these, is will you have to remove your unibody? Now in this case I haven't. Now the last 2 years I've been running my 315 35-18 Hoosier A7 tires with my MCS coilover setup, and those already did poke out beyond the body. Now I never had them rub once. I set the ride height so they don't rub under heavy load. The suspension's pretty stiff and it does flex, so it's not unbelievably stiff, but they don't rub. So what I did is the same here. I did not remove the inner fender lip. Now if for some reason I don't do the first race video in February, it's because something went horribly wrong or I got rained out. So hopefully that will be enough. Now I did test this in the neighborhood, taking some hard turns, although not very fast. Obviously you want to obey all of the safety rules and legal rules and stuff. But, you know, I also tested it by going over bumps and curbs, and it didn't rub anywhere, so I suspect that my suspension's still sort of stiff enough, and, well, we're just going to see what happens before I make a very permanent modification, like removing the entire inner fender lip here. Now, I did drill into the car, obviously, as you saw earlier in the video, but that's a lot easier to fix than removing the fender lip, so if it does rub, some of the other options are to potentially try and roll it a little bit, kind of bang it out a little bit, or unfortunately have to cut it. So I'll bring my cutting wheel with me and hopefully it won't come to that. Well, that's it for the Maier Racing fender flare and fender assembly overview video. Be sure to tune into this video here once I make it for the first race to see what the car looks like with the wheels on and everything together. It is absolutely awesome. And we have some cool new tools we're going to be using. We're going to be using a solo shot, which is an auto tracking and zooming camera. And we'll have a couple other new cool fun things out there for the race, so be sure to watch that.